32% of Republican caucus goers say that they're extremely enthusiastic about their candidate, just a third. But nearly half of Trump supporters say that about him. Considering the blustery cold, the winds in Iowa today, the snow, what could these numbers mean for Haley and DeSantis?
Yeah, Andrea, these numbers could actually be the entire ball game given the weather conditions that are out there. And also do note that caucus contests are always about enthusiasm in the first place. There's not any early voting. There's not vote by mail. You have to show up at caucus time to participate. And so enthusiasm means so much. And so, yes, our poll shows that Donald Trump supporters have the most enthusiasm. 49% are extremely enthusiastic about him. Then behind that, that is Ron DeSantis with 23% of his supporters extremely enthusiastic. And then well below that is Nikki Haley at just 9%. And so when we're talking about that race for second place between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, with Nikki Haley slightly ahead of DeSantis, those enthusiasm numbers could actually make that race for second place even closer than our poll shows.
Yeah, Charlie, take a look at that. What to you explains the gap between 20% of likely caucus goers say Haley is their first choice candidate, but very little enthusiasm that supporters have when you dig down in the numbers for her?
Yeah, well, Mark is absolutely right that this could be absolutely decisive. It takes a lot of enthusiasm to leave the house in this kind of frigid cold and go to some, elementary school gym to stand around and caucus. My guess is that a lot of that Haley support comes from people who are not necessarily pro-Haley, but they're anti-Trump. They may be independents or Democrats that are supporting her because they think that she has the best chance of derailing Donald Trump. So they're not that enthusiastically pro-Haley, but they're turning out to block Donald Trump. But I think that's always a disadvantage in a campaign like this, particularly in a night like this, where it really is all about motivation, enthusiasm, and an organization.
And Mark, when it comes to support for the eventual nominee, when you look back in history in Republican Iowa caucuses, the Iowa winner doesn't usually determine who the nominee is. But in this case, if Trump is over 50%, that sends such a strong message to the anti-Trump Republicans as to where they might go. So where would Haley and DeSantis supporters go in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, in Nevada, if Trump polls
and so, Andrea,
that heavily?
Yeah, Andrea, our poll is actually very indicative of that next contest in New Hampshire. In Iowa, half of Nikki Haley's supporters, according to the NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll, are either independents or crossover Democrats. And that kind of voter composition is that seems tailor-made to New Hampshire, where the polls show Nikki Haley much closer versus Donald Trump than they are in Iowa. But the challenge for Nikki Haley is that once you get beyond New Hampshire, that all of a sudden those voter compositions, it's much more registered Republicans, conservative Republicans. So it becomes tougher for her as she goes into places like South Carolina, her home state, as well as those Super Tuesday contests. And Charlie was just mentioning also, the anti-Trump vote that seems to be a very important part of Nikki Haley's coalition. Our poll found 43% of Haley supporters saying that they're going to vote for Joe Biden in the general election, making her candidacy and coalition a lot different than the other Republicans that are running here.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has seized on that factor to say that she's not a true conservative. Charlie, how much will the result of Iowa really affect the primaries to come in the early states? Does that depend entirely on how well Trump does?
Well, as we've seen, it's not always predictive. Otherwise, Ted Cruz would have been president, right? Or Mike Huckabee or Rick Santorum. New Hampshire voters are notoriously independent. But as Mark just mentioned, Donald Trump has one firewall after another coming up after New Hampshire. Whatever happens in New Hampshire, you roll into South Carolina, you roll into places like Nevada, where Donald Trump, continues to have a huge margin. And the reality is that Nikki Haley cannot put together a Republican primary majority simply on the basis of Democratic and independent votes in those states. So it might, she might come out with some momentum to New Hampshire, but where do you go after New Hampshire? What is the scenario? And it's very difficult to see that.